Arcadia's Code. Chapter 3. The Integration Test. The security in Nexus Tower had always been stringent, but this morning Elara noticed subtle differences. Additional guards in the lobby, more frequent identity scans, security drones hovering near restricted access points. The company was quietly locking down its headquarters ahead of tomorrow's Phase 2 testing. Elara kept her expression neutral as she passed through the biometric checkpoints, acutely aware of the memory crystal concealed in her watch. The old technology was specifically chosen because it wouldn't trigger the electronic scanners, but discovery during a physical search would be catastrophic. "Morning security seems enhanced," she commented casually to a colleague as they rode the elevator together. "System updates?" The woman, Elara Chen from marketing, no relation to Elara despite the shared surname, nodded. Apparently, there was an attempted intrusion into the R&D servers last night. Nothing breached, but they're taking precautions. An attempted intrusion was almost certainly a cover story, Elara realized. The increased security was aimed at potential internal threats, specifically her team. She forced a smile. Can't be too careful with proprietary tech. When she reached her assigned workstation, she found Theo already there, engrossed in code on his display. He glanced up briefly as she sat down, his eyes communicating volumes despite his casual greeting. "Security's tight," he murmured once she was settled, keeping his voice low and his gaze on his screen. "Full spectrum monitoring in all common areas. They've even activated the emotional pattern analysis in the building's environmental systems." That was concerning. Nexus's most advanced buildings, including its headquarters, were equipped with environmental sensors that could detect subtle changes in vocal stress patterns, facial microexpressions, and even pheromone levels, ostensibly to optimize lighting, temperature, and air quality for occupant comfort, but equally useful for detecting deception or stress. "Anything from Nakamura?" she asked quietly, initializing her workstation. "Nothing direct. But the integration test has been moved up to 11 o'clock instead of 2 o'clock. Less preparation time for us." Elara checked her schedule and saw the updated meeting notification. 3 hours less than they'd planned for. "They're trying to keep us off balance." "And succeeding," Theo admitted. "We need to move up our timeline too." They couldn't risk further conversation in the monitored workspace. Instead, they fell into their usual development routine, working on their assigned tasks while mentally preparing for the real work ahead, sabotaging the very system they were supposed to be perfecting. At 10:30, they joined the steady stream of Ascension team members heading toward Integration Lab 5, a massive chamber that housed physical representations of Arcadia's core processing nodes. Unlike the beautiful simulation that users experienced, the physical infrastructure of Arcadia was industrial and imposing. Row upon row of quantum processing units, neural network accelerators, and holographic data storage arrays, all bathed in the blue glow of cooling fluid that circulated through transparent conduits. Fincher was already there, engaged in intense conversation with the head of system security, a stern woman named Diane Reeves, whose cybernetic eye enhancements were rumored to contain advanced lie detection capabilities. They fell silent as Elara and Theo approached, both turning to observe them with calculating expressions. "Miss Chen, Mr. Kim," Fincher greeted them, his tone pleasant but his eyes sharp. "Ready for today's integration test? We've accelerated the schedule slightly." "So we noticed," Elara replied, keeping her voice steady. "Any particular reason for the change?" "Optimization of resources," he said smoothly. "The Phase 2 testing tomorrow requires all systems at peak efficiency. Better to address any integration issues with ample time for resolution." It was a reasonable explanation, but Elara didn't believe it for a moment. The change was designed to disrupt their plans, which meant Nexus suspected something but lacked specifics. If they'd had concrete evidence of sabotage intentions, security would have detained them already. Dr. Nakamura arrived last, her pristine lab coat and perfect posture a stark contrast to the tension evident in her eyes as she surveyed the room. "Dr. Nakamura," Fincher acknowledged. "I was beginning to think you might miss our little test." "My ethical review procedures take exactly as long as regulations require, Mr. Davis," she replied coolly. "No more, no less." Fincher's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. Please, everyone take your positions. We'll begin the integration test momentarily. The Ascension team spread out to their assigned monitoring stations, specialized interfaces that allowed direct interaction with Arcadia's core systems rather than the simulated environments users experienced. Elara's station gave her access to the emotional data collection systems she had helped design, while Theo's placed him at the neural network monitoring arrays. Nakamura, as ethics division head, had a unique station that displayed the compliance metrics and safety parameters, a position that, in theory, granted her override authority if ethical boundaries were breached. In practice, Elara knew, those overrides could be countermanded by Fincher at any time. Initiating integration test sequence, announced the lead systems engineer, a solemn man named Ravi who had worked on Arcadia since its inception. Connecting emotional data collection framework to enhanced neural mapping system. On the massive central display, a visualization of Arcadia's core architecture appeared. A pulsing, three-dimensional lattice of interconnected nodes representing different system components. As the integration began, new connections formed between the emotional data collection nodes, which Elara had modified, and the neural mapping system, which would be used for consciousness transfer. This was the critical moment. While the systems were in flux during integration, security protocols would temporarily relax to allow data flow calibration. It created a brief window where Elara and Theo could implement their sabotage without triggering immediate alerts. Elara glanced at Theo, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Then, under the guise of routine calibration, she inserted a data crystal into her station's diagnostic port. Running standard optimization protocols on emotional data pathways, she announced, as expected of her role. But the code now streaming into the system wasn't just optimization. It contained her dual sabotage, the redirection protocol that would divert consciousness data during tomorrow's test, and the contamination code that would corrupt the emotional reference libraries. Across the room, Theo was executing his part of the plan, modifying the neural network's verification protocols to accept the redirected data without triggering alerts. His fingers moved confidently across his interface, his expression one of professional concentration. "I'm detecting unusual data patterns in the integration sequence," said Reeves suddenly, her cybernetic eye glowing more intensely as she focused on her security monitoring displays. "Source unknown." Elara's heart rate spiked, but she kept her hands moving steadily across her interface. The contamination code was still uploading. She needed another 30 seconds at least. This was where Nakamura's distraction came in. "Mr. Davis!" Nakamura called out, her voice carrying clearly across the lab. "I'm registering multiple ethical compliance breaches in the neural mapping system, Class 2 violations at minimum." Fincher turned sharply toward her. "That's impossible. The mapping system has been fully vetted." "Nevertheless," Nakamura insisted, turning her display so he could see the flashing warnings. "The integration is triggering consent boundary exceptions. See for yourself." As Fincher moved to examine Nakamura's station, his attention momentarily diverted from Elara and Theo. They exchanged a quick glance. 20 more seconds needed. "These are false positives," Fincher dismissed after examining Nakamura's display. "The consent frameworks are registering integration test patterns as potential user data. Easily resolved." "Not without proper documentation," Nakamura countered. "Regulation 42B specifically requires all consent exceptions to be logged and reviewed, even during testing phases." Their argument continued, creating precious seconds of distraction. On Elara's monitor, the upload progress bar reached 100%. She quickly removed the data crystal and closed the diagnostic interface, replacing it with the standard monitoring displays just as Reeves approached her station. "Ms. Chen," the security chief said, her cybernetic eye scanning Elara's display. "What modifications have you made to the emotional data pathways during this integration?" "Standard optimization only," Elara replied, bringing up the logs of her official activities. "Calibrating the response thresholds for high-intensity emotional states, as specified in the test parameters." Reeves leaned closer, her enhanced eye whirring softly as it adjusted focus. There were anomalous data patterns originating from this sector. Explain. Possibly feedback from the neural mapping system, Elara suggested, projecting calm confidence despite her racing heart. The integration sometimes creates temporary artifacts as the systems synchronize. Reeves didn't sound convinced, but without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, she couldn't take action. Run a full diagnostic on your subsystem when the test concludes. Of course, Elara agreed. Across the room, she could see that Theo had also been approached by a security analyst, but appeared to be handling the situation with similar composure. The integration test continued for another 40 minutes, with system engineers verifying connections between Arcadia's various components. To Elara's relief, their sabotage remained undetected. The changes they had made were designed to activate only during actual consciousness transfer attempts, not during the simulated data flows of a test. When the test finally concluded, Fincher addressed the team. "Excellent work, everyone, despite some minor anomalies." His gaze flickered briefly to Elara and Theo. "The integration appears successful. All systems are prepared for tomorrow's Phase 2 testing." He gestured toward Reeves. "As a precaution, security will be conducting comprehensive system verification throughout the remainder of the day. All team members are required to submit their access logs and modification records for review by 17 Hunquak." It was a tactical move, Elara realized. He suspected sabotage, but couldn't pinpoint it, so he was casting a wide net, hoping to catch any irregularities in the formal documentation. Additionally, Fincher continued, "All Ascension team members will remain on site until tomorrow's testing is complete. Accommodation has been arranged in the residential levels. This is for both security and convenience, given the early start time." Elara exchanged an alarmed glance with Theo. Being confined to Nexus Tower overnight hadn't been part of their calculations. It would make communication with Atlas impossible and significantly complicate any further preparations. "Is that really necessary, Mr. Davis?" Nakamura challenged. "Confining staff to the building infringes on personal freedom regulations." "It's completely voluntary, Doctor," Fincher replied with a thin smile. "Anyone who wishes to decline the accommodation is free to do so. Though, of course, they would then be removed from the Phase 2 testing team for security reasons." It was a masterful trap. Refusing to stay would immediately mark them as suspects, while staying meant being under constant surveillance with limited ability to communicate securely. "I appreciate the accommodation," Elara said smoothly, making her decision. "Given the importance of tomorrow's test, the extra preparation time will be valuable." Theo followed her lead, also accepting the arrangement. They needed to remain on the test team if they had any hope of ensuring their sabotage succeeded. As the team dispersed, Fincher approached Elara directly. "A word, Ms. Chen," he said, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the lab. Elara followed, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. "Your contributions to Project Ascension have been invaluable," Fincher said once they were relatively private. "Your understanding of emotional data architecture is unparalleled, which is why I find recent events so puzzling." "Recent events, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. Fincher studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. "You accessed historical test data outside your assigned parameters. You've been meeting with Dr. Nakamura in secured labs. And today, during the integration test, there were anomalous data patterns originating from your station." He wasn't asking questions, just stating facts, seeing how she would react. Elara maintained eye contact, refusing to show the guilt or fear he was looking for. "I've been thorough in my preparation for the Phase 2 testing," she replied. "That included reviewing previous test results to optimize my algorithms and consulting with Dr. Nakamura to ensure ethical compliance. As for today's anomalies, as I explained to Ms. Reeves, integration often creates temporary artifacts in the data flow." Fincher's expression remained calculating. "Arcadia is more than just a project, Elara. It's the future of human consciousness itself. The work we're doing transcends conventional ethics or legal frameworks. We're creating something entirely new." "I understand the significance of our work," she said carefully. "Do you?" he challenged. "Because sometimes I wonder if any of you truly grasp what we're building here." Arcadia isn't just a virtual world or even a potential home for consciousness. It's a new plane of existence where the limitations of physical reality and physical minds can be transcended. There was a fervor in his eyes that unsettled Elara deeply. This wasn't just corporate ambition or scientific curiosity. It was something closer to religious zealotry. "What exactly will tomorrow's Phase 2 test involve?" she asked, needing to understand the full scope of what they were attempting to prevent. Fincher's expression softened slightly, perhaps interpreting her question as interest rather than concern. "We'll be conducting a synchronized consciousness extraction from multiple subjects experiencing complementary emotional states. The extracted consciousness fragments will be temporarily merged within Arcadia's framework, creating the first truly collective intelligence." "And the subjects?" Elara pressed. "They've consented to this procedure?" A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "They've consented to use Arcadia, which gives us the right to collect and utilize their data. The specific form of that utilization is at our discretion." It was exactly as Atlas and Nakamura had warned. Users were being treated as nothing more than resources to be harvested, their most intimate mental experiences extracted without their knowledge or consent. "I see," Elara said, keeping her revulsion from showing. "And after the test, what happens to the merged consciousness?" "It will be preserved for study, of course. If the merger is successful, it will represent the first example of a new form of intelligence, one that transcends individual human limitations." Fincher's eyes gleamed with something that went beyond scientific enthusiasm. "Imagine it, Elara. A consciousness built from the combined experiences of multiple humans, but free from the constraints of individual identity. Neither human nor artificial, but something entirely new." The implications were staggering and horrifying. Nexus wasn't just violating users' consent. They were planning to create entities from fragmented human consciousness, beings that would exist in a state of permanent disembodiment within Arcadia's digital framework. "It's certainly revolutionary," she managed to say. Fincher smiled, clearly mistaking her hesitation for awe. "Tomorrow, you'll witness the birth of digital divinity, Elara. I'm counting on your expertise to ensure the emotional data collection functions perfectly." His expression hardened slightly. "Which is why I expect absolute focus from you for the remainder of our preparation. No more unauthorized system access. No more private consultations with the ethics department." It was a clear warning. She was being watched, her movements restricted, her communications monitored. "Understood, sir," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "My focus is entirely on ensuring tomorrow's success." At least that much was true, though her definition of success differed radically from his. The residential levels of Nexus Tower occupied floors 60 through 70, providing temporary accommodation for visiting executives, special project teams, and the occasional government representative. The apartments were luxurious but sterile, every surface embedded with monitoring technology disguised as convenience features. Elara had been assigned a unit on the 65th floor, while Theo was placed 2 floors above. A deliberate separation, she assumed, to make communication more difficult. Nakamura, as a department head, had permanent quarters on the executive level, even further removed. As she entered the assigned apartment, Elara was acutely aware of the surveillance. Unlike the neural labs with their Faraday shielding, these spaces were designed for constant monitoring. Every word, every action would be recorded and analyzed. She placed her few belongings on the pristine white counter and explored the space, noting the locations of the most obvious monitoring devices, environmental sensors in the ceiling, cameras disguised as lighting fixtures, even the digital assistant panel that would record any spoken words. The only relatively private space would be the bathroom, where privacy regulations required limited surveillance, but even there, water usage patterns and environmental readings would be monitored. After a brief shower, during which she whispered to herself, "It's fine, just nervous about tomorrow's big test," to explain any stress indicators the monitoring might detect, Elara settled on the couch with her workplace tablet, reviewing the official test protocols for the following day. The details confirmed everything Fincher had told her, and more. Phase 2 would involve simultaneous consciousness extraction from 12 users in various therapeutic environments, focusing on those experiencing intense emotional states, grief counseling, trauma therapy, euphoria treatment. The extracted consciousness fragments would be channeled into Arcadia's Ascension framework, where they would be merged into a collective entity. The test was scheduled for 6:00 a.m., deliberately early to coincide with minimal staffing in most departments, ensuring limited witnesses. Only the core Ascension team would be present, along with Fincher and 2 board members who had taken a special interest in the project. Elara continued reading, her disgust growing with each new detail. The protocols included contingencies for subject instability, clinical language for the psychological damage that might result from having portions of one's consciousness forcibly extracted. Medical teams would be on standby to administer memory reconstruction therapy to affected users, essentially overwriting their memories of the experience with artificial ones. It was monstrous, a fundamental violation of human autonomy disguised as technological progress. And tomorrow, 12 unwitting people would be subjected to it unless the sabotage she and Theo had implemented functioned as intended. A soft chime from the apartment's communication panel interrupted her thoughts. "Incoming call, Theodore Kim," announced the system's pleasant voice. "Accept," Elara said, setting aside the tablet. Theo's face appeared on the wall screen, his expression carefully neutral. "Hey, just checking in about tomorrow's schedule. Want to grab breakfast before the test? They're opening the cafeteria at 5:00. It was a transparent attempt to create an opportunity for communication away from their constantly monitored apartments. "Sure, 5:00 works," she replied. "I could use the fuel for what's sure to be an intense day." "Great. Also, I was reviewing the neural mapping modifications, and I had a thought about optimizing the response thresholds." Theo launched into a detailed technical discussion that would sound like ordinary work conversation to anyone monitoring, but contained coded updates on his end of the sabotage implementation. Through carefully chosen technical terminology, he managed to convey that his portions of the modifications had remained undetected during the security team's reviews, but that he was concerned about the enhanced monitoring planned for the actual test. Elara responded in kind, using their shared technical vocabulary to communicate her own updates while appearing to simply discuss work. The conversation continued for several minutes, both of them careful to maintain the appearance of routine professional collaboration. "Well, I should let you get some rest," Theo finally said. "Big day tomorrow." "Indeed," Elara agreed. "See you at breakfast." After the call ended, she returned to reviewing the test protocols, searching for any details that might affect their plan. The more she read, the more convinced she became that they had made the right decision. What Nexus was planning went beyond ethical violations. It was an assault on the very concept of individual consciousness. Eventually, fatigue overtook her, and she prepared for bed, though she doubted sleep would come easily. As she lay in the darkness, her mind raced with contingency plans and worst-case scenarios. The sabotage was in place, but so many things could still go wrong. Nexus's security systems were among the most advanced in the world, and Fincher's suspicions were already aroused. Despite her anxiety, Elara must have drifted off, because she suddenly found herself jolted awake by the apartment's communication system. "Message from Security Chief Reeves," announced the pleasant voice. "All Ascension team members report to Integration Lab 5 immediately. Phase 2 testing timeline has been advanced." Elara sat up, disoriented and alarmed. The display showed 3:17 a.m., nearly 3 hours before the scheduled test time. They were moving the timeline up again, trying to catch potential saboteurs off guard. It was a classic security tactic, and one that could potentially derail their entire plan if Nakamura wasn't informed in time. Hastily dressing, Elara rushed from the apartment, her mind racing. In the elevator, she found Theo already there, his expression grim. "They're trying to rush us," he murmured as she joined him, keeping his voice low. "Security sweeps found something." "The sabotage?" she whispered, heart sinking. He gave a small shake of his head. "Don't think so. Something else, something external. I overheard 2 security officers talking about a perimeter breach. That would explain the sudden timeline change." If Nexus Security had detected an external threat, possibly Atlas or their associates attempting to gather evidence or disrupt the test, moving up the schedule would be a logical countermeasure. When they reached Integration Lab 5, they found it already bustling with activity. Technicians hurried between workstations, preparing systems that should have had hours more configuration time. Fincher stood at the center, issuing rapid instructions, his usual composure replaced by tense urgency. "Chen, Kim, finally," he said as he spotted them. "Take your stations immediately. We're initiating the Phase 2 protocol in 15 minutes. "Sir, many of the preliminary checks haven't been completed," Elara protested, buying time as she scanned the room for Nakamura. "The emotional data calibration alone requires at least. Circumstances have necessitated an accelerated timeline." Fincher cut her off. "Make whatever adjustments you can in the time available. This test will proceed as planned." As they moved to their assigned stations, Elara whispered to Theo, "Where's Nakamura?" "Haven't seen her," he replied tensely. "If she's not here when they start, she'll be excluded from the process, unable to help if something goes wrong," Elara finished. It was a serious complication. Without Nakamura's access to the ethical override systems, their options would be limited if the sabotage failed or was detected. At her workstation, Elara quickly began the standard preparation procedures, while surreptitiously checking that their modifications remained in place. To her relief, both the data redirection protocol and the contamination code appeared intact. Either they hadn't been discovered during security sweeps, or they had been discovered but left in place to trap the saboteurs. Across the lab, Reeves was coordinating a team of security analysts, their attention focused on external monitoring systems rather than internal ones. Whatever had triggered the schedule change, it appeared to be coming from outside Nexus Tower. "Attention, all personnel," Fincher announced, his voice cutting through the tense activity. "We have received credible intelligence that certain external organizations are attempting to interfere with Project Ascension. The nature of this technology makes it a target for both corporate espionage and misguided, ethical interventions. We will not allow years of groundbreaking work to be compromised." He gestured toward a massive display where 12 separate video feeds appeared, live connections to various therapeutic environments within Arcadia. In each, a user was engaged in an intense emotional experience, some in therapy sessions reliving traumatic memories, others in euphoria chambers experiencing peak emotional states. "These subjects represent optimal consciousness integration candidates," Fincher continued. "The intensity of their current emotional states creates distinct neural signatures that will serve as the foundation for our first multi-consciousness merger." Elara felt physically ill as she watched the unwitting users, each believing they were in a safe, private environment while actually being prepared for what amounted to partial mind theft. "Where is Dr. Nakamura?" she asked loudly, drawing attention to the ethics director's absence. "Ethical oversight is mandatory for human subject research." Fincher's expression hardened. "Dr. Nakamura has been temporarily relieved of her duties due to a conflict of interest. The Ethics Division's assistant director will be joining us shortly to provide the necessary oversight." Meaning they had neutralized Nakamura somehow, possibly detaining her if they discovered her connection to the resistance movement. It was a severe blow to their plan, removing a key ally and the one person with legitimate authority to halt the test on ethical grounds. "Commencing final systems check," announced Ravi, the lead systems engineer. "Neural mapping array online. Consciousness extraction protocols initialized. Emotional data collection systems." He paused, frowning at his display. "Ms. Chen, we're seeing unusual response patterns in the emotional data metrics. Please verify your subsystem status." This was it, the moment of truth. The contamination code was beginning to affect the system, creating subtle inconsistencies that would only become apparent during actual operation. "Checking now," Elara replied, pretending to analyze the anomaly, while actually implementing a series of false corrections that would amplify rather than resolve the issues. "There appears to be a calibration drift in the high-intensity emotional response mappings, attempting to compensate." Across the room, Theo was engaged in a similar performance, highlighting apparent issues with the neural network integration that would necessitate adjustments. adjustments designed to ensure the redirection protocol remained active. "We don't have time for extensive recalibration," Fincher said impatiently. "Make the essential adjustments and proceed. The subjects are at optimal emotional states now." "Sir, these anomalies could compromise the entire test," Elara argued, desperately trying to delay. "If the emotional data mapping is inaccurate, the consciousness extraction could—" "I'm well aware of the theoretical risks, Ms. Chen," Fincher interrupted. "But I'm also aware that perfect conditions rarely present themselves in pioneering research. Proceed with the test." With a sinking heart, Elara realized they had run out of options for delay. The test would proceed, ready or not. Their only hope now was that the sabotage would function as designed, redirecting the consciousness data and corrupting the reference libraries without being detected until it was too late. "Beginning consciousness extraction sequence," Ravi announced, initiating the procedure. On the main display, indicators appeared beside each subject, monitoring their neural activity as the system began its invasive work. Arcadia's consciousness extraction wasn't a physical process. There were no visible signs that anything unusual was happening to the users. They continued their therapeutic sessions, unaware that portions of their consciousness were being siphoned into Nexus's experimental framework. Elara watched her monitors intently, tracking the data flow as it moved through her modified emotional collection system. So far, the redirection appeared to be working. The consciousness data was being diverted to the secure partition Theo had established rather than flowing into the merger framework. But something was wrong. The system was extracting far more than the brief consciousness fragments described in the test protocols. Instead of the planned partial extraction, it appeared to be attempting a complete consciousness transfer for all 12 subjects simultaneously. "Sir, the extraction parameters are exceeding established safety thresholds," she warned, genuine alarm in her voice. "The system is attempting full-spectrum consciousness capture." Fincher didn't appear concerned. "A necessary adjustment. Our previous tests indicated that partial extraction created unstable patterns. For a viable merger, we need comprehensive neural signatures." "But the subjects haven't consented to full consciousness transfer," Theo protested. "The neurological risks are acceptable given the potential breakthrough," Fincher finished coldly. "Continue the process." On the subject monitors, signs of distress began to appear. Several users in the therapeutic environments suddenly stopped mid-session, expressions of confusion and fear crossing their faces as they sensed something wrong. A draining sensation, a fragmentation of thought, a sudden difficulty maintaining cognitive coherence. "Subject neurological stability compromised," reported one of the medical monitors. "Recommending immediate termination of extraction." "Continue," Fincher ordered, his voice hard. "We're approaching the merger threshold." Elara exchanged a desperate glance with Theo. Their redirection protocol was working, but it wasn't enough. The subjects were still experiencing the extraction attempt, still suffering the neurological effects, even though their consciousness data wasn't actually reaching its intended destination. She had to make a choice. The contamination code was their backup plan, designed to render Arcadia's emotional reference libraries permanently unusable for consciousness transfer. But activating it now would make their sabotage obvious and potentially put them in immediate danger. Yet watching the suffering of the test subjects, people who had turned to Arcadia for help with their emotional pain only to have their very consciousness violated, Elara knew there was no choice at all. Under the guise of attempting to stabilize the extraction process, she entered the command sequence that would trigger the contamination protocol's final phase, a cascade of contradictory emotional reference data that would render consciousness transfer impossible. Almost immediately, warning alerts began flashing across multiple displays. The emotional data architecture, her architecture, began generating error messages as the contaminated reference libraries created irreconcilable paradoxes in the system's attempt to process consciousness data. "What's happening?" Fincher demanded, striding to the central control station. "Why is the merger failing?" "Emotional reference integrity breach," Ravi reported, frantically trying to isolate the problem. "The system is encountering contradictory pattern definitions in the foundational libraries." Fincher turned to Elara, sudden understanding and fury darkening his expression. "What have you done?" Before she could respond, a new alert sounded. this one from the security systems. "Perimeter breach confirmed," announced Reeves, her cybernetic eye glowing intensely. "Multiple infiltrators detected on levels 37 through 42. Security protocols activated." Chaos erupted in the lab as security alerts blared and the consciousness extraction system continued to deteriorate. Technicians rushed between stations, trying to stabilize the failing process while security personnel began sealing the lab entrances. "External interference?" Fincher demanded of Reeves. "Negative," she replied grimly. "The system breach is internal. Sabotage, not hacking. And the perimeter infiltrators appear to be government regulatory agents, not corporate." Fincher's gaze locked onto Elara, comprehension and rage contorting his features. You did this. You corrupted my system, and now you've brought regulators into my building." "I did what was necessary to stop an illegal and immoral experiment," Elara replied, abandoning pretense. "Those are people you're experimenting on, not data sources. They're raw material for something greater than themselves, greater than any individual human could ever be," Fincher snarled. "And you've just set human evolution back by decades." Security personnel were moving toward Elara and Theo now, weapons drawn. But before they could reach them, the lab's main doors slid open to admit a group of figures in the distinctive uniforms of the Global Neural Rights Commission, the international regulatory body responsible for enforcing laws protecting neural autonomy. At their head stood Dr. Nakamura, apparently free rather than detained as Elara had feared. And beside her, to Elara's shock, was Atlas, their mysterious ally, now revealed to be a senior GNRC investigator. "Fincher Davis," announced the lead GNRC agent, "by the authority of the Neural Protection Act, you and Nexus Corporation are hereby charged with illegal consciousness extraction, unauthorized neural experimentation on human subjects, and multiple violations of informed consent statutes." As the regulatory agents moved in, securing the lab and beginning to shut down the extraction process, Fincher broke away from the security team attempting to protect him and lunged toward the central control station. "You can't stop this!" he shouted, fingers flying across the emergency override controls. "The merger must be completed. The new consciousness must be born." Before anyone could reach him, he activated a final command sequence, one that bypassed the standard extraction protocols entirely, creating a direct neural link between his own NID and the Ascension framework. "Sir, don't!" Ravi cried out. But it was too late. Fincher's body went rigid, his eyes widening in shock as the system he had designed to harvest others' consciousness now connected directly to his own. For a moment, he stood frozen, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. Then his expression contorted in agony as the corrupted emotional reference libraries that Elara had sabotaged interfaced with his neural patterns, creating the same irreconcilable paradoxes that had prevented the original test from succeeding. He collapsed to the floor, the neural interface device still attached to his head, his body convulsing as his mind tried to process the contradictory data flooding through the connection. Medical personnel rushed to his side, detaching the NID and administering emergency neural stabilizers. But it was clear from their grim expressions that significant damage had already occurred. The very system he had created to transcend human limitations had instead trapped his consciousness in a loop of irresolvable contradictions. In the aftermath, as regulatory agents secured the lab and medical teams attended to both Fincher and the test subjects whose consciousnesses he had attempted to harvest, Elara found herself face to face with Atlas, now revealed as a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone used to command. "Agent Diana Vega," she introduced herself, "though I've grown rather attached to Atlas over the past months of investigation." "You're GNRC," Elara said, still processing the revelation. "You were investigating Nexus officially all along." Vega nodded. "We've had concerns about Project Ascension for some time, but lacked the evidence needed for intervention. Nexus is too powerful to move against without ironclad proof." She glanced toward where Nakamura was coordinating with other agents. "Dr. Nakamura has been our inside contact from the beginning, documenting ethical violations, but it was your discovery of the actual consciousness transfer testing that gave us what we needed. And the meeting in the park, the secure device, Necessary theater, Vega admitted. We needed to confirm your willingness to act independently before revealing our investigation. If you had immediately reported contact from Atlas to Nexus Security, it would have compromised years of work. Theo joined them, looking shell-shocked but relieved. So when security detected a perimeter breach tonight, that was us, preparing to execute our search warrant, Vega confirmed. Fincher must have been tipped off, which is why he accelerated the test schedule. He was hoping to achieve his consciousness merger before we could stop him. And would have, if not for your sabotage, Nakamura added, approaching the group. The corruption of the emotional reference libraries was particularly effective. It will take months, if not years, for Nexus to rebuild that architecture, by which time comprehensive regulations will be in place. Elara looked toward where medical teams were stabilizing the test subjects, people who had nearly had portions of their consciousness stolen for Fincher's vision of digital evolution. Will they be all right? She asked. Physically, yes, Vega replied. Psychologically, it's more complex. They experienced a partial consciousness fragmentation, a sensation of their selfhood being divided. There will be trauma, but with proper treatment, full recovery is expected. And Fincher? Vega's expression turned grim. His situation is more severe. By connecting directly to the system through the corrupted reference libraries, he created what neurologists call a cognitive fracture. Essentially, irreconcilable contradictions within his own thought patterns. He's alive, but fragmented. Whether he can be restored to full functionality remains to be seen. A fitting consequence, Elara thought, for someone who had been willing to fragment others' consciousness without consent. The architect of consciousness theft had fallen victim to his own creation. As the GNRC agents continued securing evidence and shutting down the Ascension systems, Vega turned to Elara and Theo with a serious expression. Your actions today prevented a fundamental violation of human neural autonomy. But this is just one project, one corporation. The technology exists now, and others will attempt similar research. She handed them each a secure identification card. The GNRC could use people with your expertise and ethical backbone. If you're interested, contact me after the dust settles. With that, she moved away to coordinate with her team, leaving Elara and Theo to contemplate the future neither of them had anticipated when they'd begun their day. So, Theo said after a moment, government neural rights agents? Despite the gravity of the situation, Elara found herself smiling. Seems like a step up from creating systems that steal people's consciousness. Definitely better benefits, he agreed, matching her attempt at levity before turning serious again. What about Arcadia itself? There are billions of users who depend on it now. It was a valid concern. Despite the horrors of Project Ascension, Arcadia served as a refuge for humanity in a world increasingly uninhabitable. Dismantling it entirely would cause its own form of harm. Arcadia will continue, Nakamura said, rejoining them. But under new management and strict regulatory oversight, the basic virtual reality platform isn't inherently harmful. It was Fincher's secret applications that crossed the line. As they talked, Elara found her attention drawn to the central display where the Arcadia system architecture was still visualized. A beautiful, complex lattice of interconnected nodes representing the digital world she had helped create. For all its problems, for all the ways it had been misused, Arcadia was still a remarkable achievement, a world built of code and imagination that had become a sanctuary for billions. We'll need to rebuild the emotional data architecture, she said thoughtfully. Design it from the ground up with user protection as the primary goal, not just as an afterthought. You're assuming you'll be allowed to remain involved, Theo pointed out. We did just commit what legally amounts to corporate sabotage. Actually, Nakamura interjected, you responded to clear evidence of illegal experimentation by taking necessary action to protect human subjects. The GNRC will ensure that's the official narrative. She smiled slightly. Benefits of having federal regulatory authorities on your side. For the first time since discovering the truth about Project Ascension, Elara felt a sense of cautious hope. The immediate danger had been averted, and perhaps there was now an opportunity to rebuild Arcadia as it should have been all along. A digital world that served humanity rather than exploiting it. as the chaotic activity in the lab gradually resolved into ordered procedure, with GNRC agents documenting evidence and medical teams stabilizing the affected subjects. Elara found a moment of quiet to process everything that had happened. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from idealistic programmer believing she was building a better world, to reluctant saboteur fighting to prevent that world from becoming something monstrous, to now standing amid the aftermath, facing an uncertain but potentially hopeful future. Arcadia had been intended as a digital paradise, a sanctuary from a deteriorating physical world. Instead, under Fincher's guidance, it had nearly become something far darker, a hunting ground for human consciousness itself. The paradise had been corrupted, but perhaps now it could be reclaimed and rebuilt as it should have been all along. The code she had written, both the original emotional data architecture and the contamination protocol that had corrupted it, would need to be replaced with something new, something designed from its foundation to protect rather than exploit. It would be a monumental task, but one worth undertaking. As she watched the GNRC agents begin the process of securing Arcadia's systems, Elara felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The digital world she had helped create had nearly been used to violate the most fundamental human right, the right to one's own mind. Ensuring that never happened again would be the work of years, perhaps a lifetime. But for the first time in days, that future no longer seemed impossibly dark. There would be challenges, investigations, likely legal battles as Nexus fought the regulatory intervention. But the immediate danger had passed, and with it, the need for desperate measures. Elara glanced toward Theo, who was deep in conversation with one of the GNRC technical specialists, already explaining the modifications they had made to redirect the consciousness data. He caught her eye and gave a small, tired smile, an acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together and what still lay ahead. Whatever came next, she realized, would be built on the choices they had made today. Choices to protect rather than exploit, to preserve individual autonomy rather than sacrifice it for a questionable vision of progress. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the code they wrote or the systems they built, but the human values those creations either served or threatened. As dawn broke over New Metro, visible through the lab's high windows as a faint lightening of the perpetually hazy sky, Elara turned her attention to the future. Arcadia and the world had a long way to go. But today, at least, humanity's right to its own consciousness had been preserved, and that was worth everything they had risked to achieve it. Thank you for reading Chapter 3 of Arcadia's Code. If you've been following Elara's journey through the dark secrets of Nexus Corporation, please don't forget to like and subscribe for the next chapters. The truth about Arcadia has been exposed, but what will happen next? Will Elara help rebuild the system? What consequences will Fincher face for his actions? Share your thoughts and predictions in the comments below.